All right, so welcome to the show. I'm here with none other than Ryan Cojoe, and I'm very privileged to bring him on. He's the founder and managing director of Cotoc LLC. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You know, one of the things I always like to talk about is entrepreneurship, growing a business, and the kind of the trials and tribulations, but the rewards that come with that. I'm curious, what was it that initially got you inspired to even start this type of business?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me today, Rollis. I'm an industrial engineer, which means I'm a process engineer by training. And so I'm always thinking of processes and better ways to do things. I started my career out in corporate America at Accenture. And the entire time I was there, I would always think of what are better ways that I could do this.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so you're working at Accenture, and then you figured out you want to do this on your own. What are some things that you saw that, you know what, I want to do this better? I'm sure there were some things that you noticed when you were there that you were going to do differently when you started your own business.
Yeah, so the way that you deal with the client, right, and kind of putting the client business before your business was a thing that I knew that I had to put the client in the center of everything that we did and everything that we build.
Ah, makes sense. Okay. Give me some examples of what that looks like when you say putting the client in the center, because I think this is going to help other businesses who are trying to think about how to differentiate themselves as a business. What are some things you did to make the client be more in the center of things?
Yeah, you know, you're putting on a hat that not is the hat of your boss or of yourself. You're putting on a hat of the person who is going to be then using the technology or the processes that you're using. So you have to think about things from their perspective, from their pain points. How is what we're delivering going to make their lives better? And trying to explain that to them. And I think that all of the other things that you get out of business, whether it's satisfying your boss or you getting promoted, those things come out of you making your client happy with the results that they're getting.
Okay. Now, what are some things that, as an entrepreneur, that you think that were kind of surprises or things that you did not think would take place as an entrepreneur versus when you were working for a company?
You know, with any business, you have to be well financed, right? And so as an entrepreneur, the money or the financing that you have gives you the fuel of how long you can go, because all businesses have natural business cycles where you have ups and you have downs. And so you have to be financed well enough to where you can make it through the ups and the downs. And so making sure that you understand what your needs are before you start the journey to make it through the journey. I like to kind of think about it in this way. If you're taking a trip across the Sahara Desert, right, do you think that it's going to be cheaper for you to buy the fuel before you start the journey or when you're in the middle of the journey?
Right.
So really understanding the financial needs even before you get to them.
That's a good point. No, and I have actually learned that in some cases the hard way. Once you get to that point, not having enough and trying to figure out how you're going to make those adjustments. Can you think back any times in your career or in your business where you had some unforeseen things come along and then you had to kind of figure out a way to make it work?
Yeah. So I have clients the same way that let me back up. Yes. So the business world and landscape is forever changing. So as my clients' needs change, what they need from me also changes. So I can understand sometimes when clients are having to make cutbacks because of different things that are going on in the business world. So they have to make cutbacks, and then that impacts my business. And so you have to learn to understand what they're going through, right? And also to kind of position yourselves for those things, right? And so that's whether that's being more efficient for your client, right? Finding better ways to help them to kind of save money and making yourself to where you're an asset to where they really rely on you to do their business, right? But I'm always kind of thinking through and having to go back to not being comfortable. Right, you're always thinking about how do I not be in this position of comfort, and how do I keep evolving as the times evolve?
And have you had one of those situations where you had difficulty in terms of, let's say, the clients impacting you because they had cutbacks, and it caused you to be more innovative in a particular way? Anything come to mind?
Yeah. very recent. One of my clients, their business model changed, right? So they went from a business model of, and I'm in a lot of software and product companies, and so the model has changed from, and if you can think about it in your personal life, where you purchase the product, you purchase a software product, and you pay, let's say, $100 for that product, and then you own the product. Or you can even think about it in terms of like music. We used to buy a CD, and then you own the CD.
Right.
Well, now in the software world, companies don't buy the software anymore. They pay a licensing fee. And so now the product company's model is changing, and therefore how they're then using the folks in their professional services is changing. Right? And so now we have to align our costs and how we get paid different, because now they're kind of almost in a subscription business.
Yes.
Right? There's not an influx of money in the very beginning that they then have to use throughout. They're getting $10 per month monthly subscription from their customers.
Okay, and of course so now that makes you, and I guess in some cases probably have to adjust your business model where you're also charging them monthly. Is that what you're saying? Or?
Well, my business has always charged them monthly, but it's adjusting to their business model for mine, right?
Okay.
So the way that I procure my resources, whether that's kind of fixed or variable, I have to make sure that my things are then aligned with my clients.
Okay, so you bring up a nice point too that I've also gotten from accountants, is that when you're looking at building a business, you have to look at your fixed versus your variable costs, and try and do your best to I guess mitigate risk by forecasting. Kind of going back to your Sahara example.
Yes.
But can you think of some examples in your business where you kind of had to make some adjustments, whether it was either on the fixed or the variable side?
Well, once COVID happened, right? A lot of my business in professional consulting, we did a lot of travel. For the first 10 years of my career, I mean, I was a million miler, flying around. But COVID taught us that you don't have to be with a client, that we can work virtual.
Right.
So I would say since COVID, almost I would say 95% of my business has been remote. So that's changed in a way of, how you then do business. So I've had to deal with the challenge of, well, do I now, since I'm home more often, do I now need office space? Right, which is a fixed cost. Right. It's once you get it, it's a fixed cost, and so you have to make the decision to say, do I need this? Can I justify it? What won't I have if I take on this cost? So it's a very real decision that I've been having to make since we're in this new world, kind of post COVID.
Makes sense, yeah. And we actually had the same dilemma in 2020. Our lease ended in October. And of course, things changed in March of that year, and so we're trying to figure out: do we keep it? Do we renew? What do we do? And man, our team just loved working remote so much. No one really wanted to go back to the office.
Yeah.
So we did not renew it, and we haven't had regular office space since. So yeah, it's a good point. That's a decision. I know right now a lot of businesses are trying to bring folks back to the offices, especially in these big complexes where they have made so much investments in the infrastructure, and other businesses put theirs close to that business. And even like if you look at like in DC, or if you look here in Houston, where there's these big, huge complexes, and a lot of businesses, they were banking on it, but no one was there. So we're trying to get folks back. Have you seen that with any of your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it with my clients, and some of my clients are in the government, so they're being impacted by folks kind of coming back to work. I know some of the major oil and gas companies, they've kind of gone from a modified work week, maybe where you come in 3 out of 5 days, to now it's 4 out of 5, and maybe they'll be kind of going back to 5 out of 5 days, right? So folks are kind of getting back more into the office. I kind of look at it 2 different ways, from my company's perspective, in that, if you're dealing with an emergency like COVID and you're adjusting and adapting, that's one thing. But as you're kind of fully operating, I think a place like an office is necessary to build culture. Because when we were adapting to a situation, most of the folks knew the company, knew the culture, they knew each other. And so now you were just kind of doing what you were doing, but you knew that. But you think about the next generation that's coming up, right? And they haven't come up in a culture, or you haven't developed any culture with them. You think about how much stuff that you learn, not just in what you're doing, but what you learn from a person who you work closely with. You lose a lot of that when you're working remotely.
That is very true. Yeah. I'm wondering though, with that in mind, if it isn't going to change, it isn't going to go back, it's the new normal, and they're going to have to find other ways of experiencing culture? Or do we have to get them back to the office so that they can experience culture again? If you had to predict, what would you say is going to be the most likely direction?
I think it'll become a hybrid. I think it'll become a hybrid because folks have tasted this new way. Folks have used the Zooms and the virtual meetings. There's not a need to fly folks out and kind of put them up for that time when you can do a lot of these things virtual. So I think that we'll stay in some kind of a hybrid of workspace.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's one of the, I'm curious about this because I know you do a lot of work in consulting. What's some of the biggest pain points that companies come across when it comes to scaling their company?
When it comes to scaling the company, a lot of times you need to have your infrastructure ready for the growth. And for a lot of companies, some companies, you get in a world of a lot of acquisitions, where one company has bought other companies. And so that company, before you bought them, they were doing business. They had an email system, they had an accounting system, they had a maintenance operation system. And when you bring all of the companies together, now everybody's kind of doing their thing a different way. And for a long time, maybe on a back end, you bring everything together. At a certain point, when you really want to grow and scale, you then have to make sure that everybody's kind of talking from the same set of data. Right? We're all talking from the same set of facts. And so then I've seen companies then try to get their infrastructure together. That's where my company kind of comes in to help, is because we can help companies to move from their kind of disparate, a lot of different accounting systems to maybe choosing one, and then now moving that across all of their organizations that they've acquired. So now you're getting on the same system, you have the same data, now you're working on your same processes, right? And now you're getting the same kind of reports that are coming out of the end. There's one source of truth that's coming out of the end. And now that's helpful for your folks at the end of the month or at the end of the year when they're putting together the taxes or whether they're putting together the financial reports. That's essential.
Yeah, it makes sense. Do you find, I know you work with public sector as well as private companies, do you find that a lot of the problems or challenges are similar, or do you think there's some distinct differences when you're seeing either of them dealing through, let's say, growth? Because even on the governmental side, they have to grow with the population, right? So whether it's public or if it's private, have you seen similarities or differences?
Yeah, there's more similarities than there are differences. I will say that in the public sector, things move at a slower pace, a slower scale.
Yes.
There's a lot more, checks and balances that have to happen. Where in the private sector, things move faster. Things move by the quarter, right? A lot of folks have quarterly earnings, and they have to make sure that they're changing in association with those quarterly earnings. Whereas the government, it's the speed of the change is not as fast as in the private sector.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you see where the public companies, and this will help for those who are watching, who are, even if they're prospecting these types of organization, do you think that the prospecting time, the amount of time it takes to onboard a client, is longer on the public side too, in comparison with private corporations?
Yes. I think that because they have their processes that they have to go through. Once they have an idea, even if they know kind of who they want to go through, there's a lot of process and procedures they have to go through, right, to pick the provider who they'd like to use, right. So I think the initial process of getting in is it's a longer tail to try to get into the public sector.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And maybe you've done the same thing I have done. I find oftentimes the contract size that I'm going for is subject to an RFP or some kind of bidding process. And so, and that's pretty much in every case I've had to do that. There's a few exceptions, but for most most part I have to do RFPs. Have you had to do that? And if so, how was that experience for you?
Yeah, no, I do a ton of it. As I said, I'm a process person. So what I do is I lay out a process in terms of how I go about attacking this, and then I refine the process. Right? You go through it. You have a real decision. Did you win or did you lose? Right? What things did you do on the ones that you won versus the thing that you lost? And you kind of do after action reports to say, what could we have done better? And then I work with my team on continuing to improve the process, right? Not everything is about the win or loss, but did we improve the process? So I get in a habit of continuing to document and then refine the process.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you're documenting? Let's say you put in this RFP, you go for it, you think you're going to get it, but for whatever reason you don't get it. And so now you're documenting, okay, what can we improve? What are some things are you looking at or documenting in that process?
Yeah. So you're trying to understand from paper what are the customer needs. As I said, everything we try to do, we try to base it around the customer. When you're in a lot of these situations, you can't talk to the customer. You only have to deal with the paper that you have in front of you, right? So you're trying to assume and interpret. One of the things I've started doing is get ahead of talking to the client when the RFP is not out there, because there are no restrictions before it's actually put onto what they kind of call the street when you can talk to them. So you have to think about things even when they're trying to put them together. So if there are events that are happening with prospective clients, you want to get in front of them even to kind of help to shape what it is that they're looking for.
That's a great point. You know, there was one not too long ago where I was in the process of bidding for it, and they had like a Q&A session, and it became apparently clear that they didn't actually know what they wanted. They weren't actually really sure. Yeah. And it took the Q&A session when we as the vendor started asking questions. They were like, this is really good. We're gonna actually pivot, kind of come back. We're gonna put some things together and then re-put this, kind of make those adjustments, because I'm wondering in how many cases they're putting things on paper and maybe they're not 100% sure what they really wanted from the beginning with. And it's not that they're not intelligent people, but it's just that in terms of the end product, what they were looking for involved some things that they didn't think about.
And think about if you could actually influence, right, what they're thinking and what they're kind of putting out there. If you're influencing, then you know already how to respond to that.
Yes.
So you're almost behind if you're only finding out about it once it's made public. You're already a little behind.
That's very interesting. What commonalities did you experience or notice on the RFPs that you won? What are some of the commonalities of those?
Well, one of the things I noticed is that a lot of the opportunities that I've actually partnered with other companies, I've had a higher success rate. So I think that my clients are looking, and they're looking for more collaboration within the industry. Because things that I've done in partnership with other companies have seemed to be the things that have had the highest win rates.
So for those who aren't as familiar, when you say partnering, they may not know exactly what that means. So are you talking about this like the prime versus the contractor subprime, or what?
Yes. So that could be a case to where, how you split the pie up, right? One thing is 100% that my company is going after opportunity, or I could say that, hey, this opportunity you put out, my company may be able to do 75% of it, and I can look for a partner who can do a 25% piece of it. Or sometimes it's vice versa, that there's a company who they have the 75% and my company has the 25%. But what I found in our data is that those partnering opportunities are the ones where we've been the most successful.
This kind of goes back to the old saying that how does it go? A percentage of something is better than 100%
Everything.
Of nothing.
Yes. Yeah.
So you found more success in partnering with other organizations. Did you find yourself more the subcontractor or the prime?
It's been both.
It's been both.
It's been both. So we're in a process now where we're casting out a wide net to a lot of companies that we may partner with. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the information from talking to them, right, whether we go after this particular opportunity or not, and we're filling up our database. We're collecting the data for every conversation we have for each opportunity. So when the next opportunity comes up, either they're thinking of us, or we already have enough information to then be smart enough to say, well, company X, Y, and Z are better at this thing. Let's now call them up to see about going after this opportunity.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. So based on what you know now, from doing the RFP process, if you had the same set of knowledge when you first started, what would you have done differently starting out, going out to these RFPs in the public sector?
Yeah, as I kind of said, and as I've learned, you need to be ahead of them actually kind of going out. So when there are events that are put on where you can actually, there are events that they call meet the buyer, where you can actually go out and meet the buyer and talking to people to understand their needs. And a lot of times they understand what's coming. And so they can talk to you in those periods. So I think that you have to get ahead of the curve.
Okay.
Is the thing that we've learned that's been the most beneficial, right? Because you can ask more questions and they're open to answer them.
So getting ahead of it, making those relationships and networking with those potential buyers. What job titles would you say a person should be going after? Should it be like, I don't know, whether it's CEO or in the C-suite, a director, a VP?
I think you have to identify like who's the decision maker, right?
Okay.
And so some things maybe you're selling to a C-suite, but in a lot of things you're selling to directors, you're selling to to middle managers. So clearly understanding who is the decision maker, who is actually buying. In a lot of the processes, you have the procurement person who's facilitating the process, but they're facilitating the process. They're not the decision maker. They could be a gatekeeper, and they could keep you from getting to the decision maker, but clearly identifying that they're not the folks who are making a decision. But they then have their checklist of things that you have to do, or you could be eliminated. So making sure you get good at understanding and explicit, and they have points A, B, C that they want, so that you then can get your stuff to the decision maker.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Do you also come across RFPs or work with RFPs when it comes to, and I'll just explain, requests for proposals? Are you doing that with private companies too, or is it generally just the public companies?
It can be both. I'd probably say it's the work in the private industry is probably more referral or repeat clients.
Okay.
Whereas there's almost a mandate or requirement in the public sector where if something is over a certain dollar amount, that it has to go out for RFP. Yeah. So you see more of those there. Whereas if you've done great business in the private sector, you develop a reputation and you kind of get repeat business or you get business from referrals. But there's the times where there are companies that will put things out to the street to do an RFP.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. And I've experienced a similar dynamic as well. And I found out too that if it's particularly here in Texas, I don't know about other states, but it depends on the organization. It could be like maybe it's a university or maybe it's a hospital district or what have you. They may have anywhere from a $10,000 to a $25,000 or a $50,000 ceiling without having to put it out to bid.
Yeah.
And so there are some exceptions like the sole source. If we can get a sole source designation, it can be much higher than that and not have to go out to bid. Yeah. But in most cases, we've either looked at opportunities to be right under that ceiling. Yeah. Maybe it's $49,999 to make sure it's under the 50, or it's a situation where we have to wait for them to put an actual request for proposal out there, and then we bid on it then.
Yeah. Well, one of the lessons learned that as we're kind of talking about the RFP process, is pricing. Pricing is a very key thing, and my company, we're a small, medium-sized business, and oftentimes we're going up against very large, multi-billion-dollar customers. And one of the things I've learned is not trying to compete on price, because you would think that, hey, I want to try to go in and say I'm the lowest cost provider, right? And if you think about it in your own life, sometimes you attach less quality to a lower price you pay.
That's a good point.
So you have to understand if is the decision all based on the lowest price? Most people are not their metrics, and they will tell you our selection process is not just you have to go with the lowest person. So I think we get in the mindset of trying to play this Price is Right game where you're trying to get to the very right price. And so I think that and I've learned that you need to kind of put the price for the value of the thing that of the service that you're providing. Right, I had a situation, an experience where we were doing going after RFP, and we got shortlisted. So shortlisted means that they've kind of brought it down from a bigger group to a smaller group. Right. And when we got shortlisted, they asked us to kind of give our last and final. And so the group I work with, when we did our last and final, we thought that they were asking us for a price reduction. So our initial price that we sharpened our pencils and we said, well, hey, we think we could deliver it cheaper in these different areas. So we propose, and we didn't win. But one of the great things about some of these public companies is that they have to present the information on who the winner is.
Right.
And the winner was more expensive than we were, right? And so we went in a process where we brought our prices down because we were trying to compete on price, but we didn't win the opportunity because they were looking at who was better able to serve their needs than exactly what the price was. And I think it's a common mistake that a lot of people can kind of get into, but I think that you need to price, kind of what your price is, right, and kind of go for the value that you're providing.
That is gold. So the three things I've gotten from this conversation is, number one, try and get in and network with the folks ahead of time. So when the RFP comes out, you're already prepared. You have a leg up. Mm-hmm. I also heard, don't be afraid to partner up with other companies. Yes. Network as much as possible. I got that. And then this last point about pricing is so key. I actually had a personal experience with that too. So it was an RFP. It was a fairly large health system. We're talking like 14,000 employees. So it's a pretty good sized health system. And we put in this bid for it and we didn't get it. And I asked him later on, because I actually got a chance to talk to him about a year later. I said, hey, I was just curious, why didn't we get that bid? Because I thought our pricing was pretty good. Your pricing was so low, we didn't think you could do it.
Yeah.
He said it actually was so low to the point we weren't sure you could deliver on what you were saying you could deliver. I was like, wow.
And that's a data point you have to take back, and you have to say, the next time I'm doing it, I have to think about that, right? Because you're thinking, I'm the small guy, I'm trying to compete, but that's not often the way that will win you the business, right? Because people's perception sometimes is going to be the lowest quality, and you don't want to be there.
Yeah.
You don't want to be there.
I've also won some deals that I bid so low on it that it was very difficult to deliver the level of quality I would have liked to have delivered. So because I wanted to deliver a certain quality, I ended up losing money on the deal.
Listen, if it's a strategy, if you go into it knowing that it's a loss leader because you're trying to get something bigger, that's one thing, right? But as opposed to that you need to make a profitability off of that, then that's something different, right? Because you may make a strategic decision that we're going to go in with this as a loss leader, because now maybe we're able to get something that is it's a sole source deal, right? So if your strategy is that, then that's different than you going in and now you're not able to deliver the quality.
Yeah, 100%. No, I definitely learned that the hard way. Okay, so how would you describe your service to a high-level executive at a company that's looking to scale up?
Yeah, Cotoc LLC is a management consulting company. I worked for Accenture as a director at Accenture, and so we do a lot of things similar to what a big management consulting company does. We help companies through digital transformations. And so a lot of times those things may look like a new technology. So companies are putting in softwares to help them manage their back ends, so, their finance, their operations. We call a lot of these like ERP systems. Sometimes they're major ERP systems, enterprise resource planning. And so we can kind of help first from you identifying who are the different vendors out there that you may consider for your size and for your industry, because every provider is not great for what it is that you do. So we can even help you to kind of streamline the list of who you may want to consider. Once a decision is made, I like to think that we can kind of help you to kind of get from point A to point B. So you're going from a position where you're using certain systems, certain processes, and if the leader is a strategic visionary, then they understand where they want their company to be. And so we can kind of help to manage the process of from point A to point B. A lot of major companies, they don't, in a lifetime of an employee, they may not change systems, but maybe one or a couple of times. But in my business, I help a company do that every 1 to 2 years. So I've been through the journey several times, right, with other clients. Some are very similar to you. And so I know when you're going to get to some of the pain points. I know that you're not going to always get the value. I know that everyone is not going to be on board the whole time that you're kind of going through it. So we could help you to kind of navigate from point A to point B, the people, the processes, and the technology. Right, and that's a lot of what we do. So our services may come across as as project management. So we could deploy project managers who manage the day-to-day of the vendors or of the data that's coming along. And then we also merge that with what we call change managers. So change managers are folks who help with the transition from point A to point B, dealing mainly on the people side of business.
Okay.
You're changing the technology, but you have to communicate to the people who are going to get the new technology, who are going to have to then do the new processes, who need to be trained on that. And we make sure that not only are you capturing the folks who are directly impacted by the change, but the folks who are on the outside end of that, they may not be directly impacted, but they need to know that what I used to receive from person A is now different because they're going through this change. So you're catching the initial circle, and then you're catching the concentric circle as well. And so really just being strategic about planning and identifying, who are we hitting, who's going to be going through change, what levels of change are they going to need, and appropriately putting a plan together to touch that person and address what their kind of needs are, right? So you're thinking about before and after, where they are and where they need to be, continuing to measure and monitor that. And so I like to think that Cotoc, we do a great blend of bringing project managers and change managers together. These folks kind of working hand in hand, where you're kind of really mending and melding together the process and the technology component with the people component, and you bring those things together. And I've just seen in a lot of these business transformations, having that kind of combination increases your success rate.
Yeah,
I've seen that.
makes sense.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you said too earlier about how corporations themselves or companies themselves may only make these changes maybe once every 5, 7, 8 years, right? But you're doing it every year, so you're seeing these changes, which gives you a set of knowledge that they may not have, and help them to make that next change.
And sometimes I've seen it in your direct competitor, your peer group. If you're an oil and gas company, if you're Exxon, I may have done the same thing with Chevron, right? Or you think about whatever your business is. There's a possibility I could have done work with a peer competitor of yours, right? And not that we're divulging any of the secrets of that particular company, but I've seen the beginning and the end, and I can kind of predict the downfalls of some of those things.
Well, at the very least, it would influence what kind of advice you give. Even if you never said what happened in company A or whatever, you're able to give this certain advice that's very relevant because you dealt with a similar situation.
Yes.
I can see the value of that big time.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned oil and gas, which is typically probably going to be mostly private. Give me an example of public type or corporations or organizations you work with.
Yeah, and I would actually say that I'm starting to see in the RFPs that the public organizations are asking if you've done work with organizations that are similar to them. So if we're here in Houston and Harris County, so they may be asking, hey, we'd like to see your experience where you've done this with another population that has a similar size to Houston to Harris County.
Right.
Have you done this work for Dallas? Have you done this kind of work for San Antonio, for Austin? So they're actually looking and asking for that. But that probably came from when they did it in the past and they didn't have somebody who had that experience. Someone shared with them, here's a lesson learned, right? It's better if you have someone who's kind of done this for someone similar to you.
I have seen that. I've seen that on.
You're starting to see it.
I've seen it on RFPs. They're saying in there that's one of the qualifications we're looking for, those who have experience working in these types of. One of the more recent ones, I was bidding on it was like a what do you call it, a tourist bureau kind of thing for a certain city, and they were looking to grow their city in terms of having more folks come in and from corporations and have their conferences there and things like that. And one of the requirements from the RFP was we would like you to have worked with they named the cities. Yeah. And of course you could be from any city, but they were like the particular ones they would love to see, similar work from. Yeah. So I am seeing a lot of what you're saying. That's really good advice.
Yeah. Now that's helpful when you're doing something that's repeatable and has been done in the past. But now we're starting to get to some things that have never been done in the past before. And so when you're dealing with those challenges, right, what you have to do is you have to make sure that you have, process and procedures in place that whatever this new technology or new thing is, that you can kind of understand it, you can make sense of it, right? You think about a lot of what's going on with AI, right? And so like when you're dealing with a lot of AI, we're right on the forefront of a lot of things with that. And so there is not a lot of places where people maybe have done it before, but you have to show and prove that you have a process, you have a methodology that, hey, we can take this, we can understand this, we can together kind of go across this informational divide and kind of get there together. So understanding and not being fearful of new technologies, right? This is just the latest disruptor. This is just the latest technology, but there's always another Model T from a buggy whip, right? So this time it just comes in the name AI, but there's always disruptors in business.
Do you think that AI and the generative AI, do you think that's something that is more of a game changer, or do you think it's pretty much on par with past disruptions?
I think it's on par. It's just the speed of it, right? It's like some things they disrupt, and it takes a while. So if you think about when we went to word processors from typewriters, right? That kind of takes a time. So now just the speed of the change is just so much faster. But I think it's the same thing, right? Where technology and stuff are changing, and folks go through the same fears and level of understanding, and then adoption and acceptance. It's just the process is just so much faster.
Right. That makes sense. Well, this has been incredibly insightful. I really appreciate the conversation. Any last piece of advice that you would like to give to our audience, and you could include this, if you were to speak to your 20-year-old self, the 20-year-old version of Ryan, what advice would you give to that version of Ryan?
No, I'd say kind of move fast and break things, right? Don't think that you have to kind of stay into this kind of standard pattern. School teaches you in a lot of ways how to be a good employee. It doesn't teach you necessarily how to be an employer or an entrepreneur. And so I think that if you see yourself more in kind of that spectrum, go after those things that put you in a better position to be an entrepreneur. You don't get better at that by being a great employee. You get better at that by trying that and by doing that, right? Whether it's in big things and small things, right? So I think that I think keeping people first, right? Thinking about people, not always thinking about yourself, but putting on a cap of who you're trying to do business with, I think can be very beneficial. I'm a nerd at heart, and I'm a kind of lifetime learner. And so the thing I would say is always continue to be reading, continue to be learning, because there's always disruptors. There's always something new to learn. I think being inquisitive and being a lifetime learner, I think will always suit you well, because there's always going to be another disruptor. That's how technology works.
Okay, we're going to leave it with that. That was awesome. Appreciate your time on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. Be sure and like and subscribe and comment. We love to hear from you what you enjoyed from this presentation, as well as what you'd like to see the next time. Look forward to having you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Thanks.